You're once more welcome to this the second part of our presentation or revision class. And I remain Toko Stanley, today's presenter. So last time we did revision class. It involved food science regional mock 2020. So we did section A and section B. So today we're going to proceed with the second part, which involves section C and section D. See, the first question under section C states, briefly discuss the nutritional significance of fats and oils. So the first significance or importance of fats and oil is the fact that they provide us with what? Energy. And it must be noted here that fats provide twice as much energy as carbohydrates or proteins. Because generally there are three classes of food that provides energy, which we generally refer to them as energy giving nutrients or energy dense nutrients. So there are generally carbohydrates, proteins, and fat. But among these three classes of foods, fat provides the most, twice as much as the others. And that's why you have here, you see, it provides 9 kilocalories per gram. So the next point, fat acts as a carrier for fat-soluble vitamins, which you both know are the vitamins A, D, E, and K. We generally refer to them as ADEK, short form ADEK. So the next point, they keep the body warm. And finally, they are used to form an integral part of the membrane. So they act as what? Structural components of our membranes. And under the point where we said they keep the body warm, this point can be backed up to the fact that generally you will realize that those who are fat, people who are generally fat or overweight, they hardly ever feel cold as compared to those who are pale or thin or slim. And the reason is very simple, judging from the fact that those who are generally big in size or fat or overweight, they have a high percentage of what? Fat in their body, fat deposits. And because the fat is there, it therefore helps to provide them with what? Heat. And because it provides them with heat, they hardly ever feel the cold as compared to someone who is slim or pale, who has a very little fat on his body, and because of that the person feels cold. The least temperature change, the person feels the effect. Okay. And you also realize that those who are fat or overweight, they always sweat. Most of the times they are sweating for the simple fact that what? This one, the fat is there keeping the body warm, and when the least change in temperature, the fat always tries to obstruct, acting as an insulator, preventing heat loss. And as a result of that, they end up doing what? Their body starts reacting to that, the change, and because of it they start producing what? Sweat, to help bring down their body temperature back to normal. So that was just an outside. So back to business. And finally, the body uses fat to produce hormones. Explain the role of fats and oils in cookery. Now the first point and the most important point and role which fats and oil play in cookery is the fact that they act as what? A medium for heat transfer in the process of what? Cooking or frying. When you're frying your food or you're preparing your food, the fat or the oil simply acts as a medium to transfer heat from this main source to the food in order for it to be cooked. So the second point says they also contribute to flavor and texture of food. Practical example, if you prepare your eru, if you were to eat eru, if they give you eru with little or no oil and they give you another with oil, enough oil in it, and you have to eat or you eat it, you will get the difference. You see, the textures are very different and the flavor will completely be different. And that applies with many other food items or foodstuffs. So the next point, Oils add richness and tenderness to food since they do not solidify when cooled. Very practical. Very practical. Typical example, suppose you bought your roasted fish this evening and you were able to eat. Most of the times, what do you do the following day? You apply a bit of oil in your frying pan, or you put your fish and you warm everything up. And what does it do? It helps to make that meat or that flesh of the fish to become tender. So in such a way, it becomes rich and much more easier for you to masticate. So they are also used as seasonings and as well used in salad dressings. For example, we want to produce your salad creams. You mostly use what? Mayonnaise. Mayonnaise in this case is acting as your fat. Good. It says, explain the following for 15 marks. The first point under it, refined oils. Now, when we talk of refined oils, generally, what are we referring to? These are oils that have been tempered with in the sense that they have been treated with chemicals and they have been exposed to what? Heat. That is what makes the difference. Treatment with chemical, bleached, and upon exposure to heat. So they have been processed, and in the course of processing them, most of the nutrients are lost. That is the reason why unrefined oil is healthier than the refined oil, because it has been exposed to so many processes, so many chemicals, all in the bid to do what? To get the maximum amount of oil. So they expose it to all those conditions, and at the end of the day, some residues of those chemicals may be left in the oil, and upon consumption for a prolonged period of time, they may result to other health problems. So the process of refining reduces the nutrients, as I earlier said, and the flavor, and thus they are generally less healthy than the unrefined oils. Point, or the next part says rancidity. Now, when we talk of rancidity, what are we referring to? Rancidity, right? This simply refers to food spoilage. Food spoilage as a result of what? Fat is either completely or incompletely broken down or oxidized as a result of what? Upon exposure to light, air, moisture, or bacterial action. And because this fat has been broken down upon exposure to these various factors, it now results to what? Unpleasant taste and odors. Let me take it again. Unpleasant taste and odors. Now, do not get confused between odors and smell, because those are two different things. Now, when we talk of smell, we are referring to a scent that is pleasant. A scent, right? We scent something that is pleasant. We refer to it as what? Smell. But when you scent something which is unpleasant, uncomfortable, we now refer to that as what? Odor. So in most cases, when you prepare your food and you forget to warm it in the evening, by the time you get to the next day and you open your pot of stew or whatsoever, most of the times you realize that it starts producing some type of funny odor. This may be as a result of what? Rancidity or rancidification, which is simply what? The oil has been broken down, oxidized either completely or incompletely, and as a result of that, it has not affected the sensory properties such as taste and produce odors. So it is prevalent in foods that are rich in oil or fat. The main ingredient that brings about the rancidity or the odor. Now the next part says margarine. Now generally margarine they act like what? Substitutes to butter. It's like a substitute to butter, and they are generally more healthier, or they are healthier than the butter. Reasons being that they are derived from vegetable oil, whereas butter is from animal oil or fat. And as we know, animal fat or oil tends to have a high percentage or concentration of what? Cholesterol, as opposed to the vegetable oil, which has very little or no cholesterol at all. And we both know the effects of cholesterol to our body, though it must be stated here that cholesterol is not all that bad, because when we talk of cholesterol, there are actually two of them. We have the low density lipoprotein and the high density lipoprotein. The one that poses a problem is the low density lipoprotein or cholesterol. It is stacked bad cholesterol. That is what the one that contributes to most of the the cardiovascular diseases, because it affects the blood vessels and heart and other parts. But the high density is good. So next part, it consists of water in fat emulsion with tiny droplets of water dispersed uniformly throughout a fat phase. Very important. And now the last part, it is usually recommended as a heart healthy replacement. Why that? When we talk of healthy replacement, that is a replacement, somebody who has heart problems. Instead of you consuming butter, you can substitute the butter with what? Margarine. For reasons being that the margarine has lower saturated fat content and it is originated or made from vegetable oil, unlike butter, which is from the animal origin. So that is the difference, and that is what makes it to be a recommendation for heart healthy replacements. Says, discuss the nutrient content and structure of cereals for 8 marks. Now, before I start discussing about the nutrient content and the structure of cereals, first of all, what are cereals? Now, when we talk of cereals, cereals are simply what? Seeds or grains of cultivated grasses or grass family. I like to emphasize so much on this grass family, which originally used to grow wild. Now, in order for a grain to be referred to as a cereals, it must come from the grass family. Grass family. That is what gives it that appellation that it is a cereal, and that is more of the reason why beans will not fall under the category of cereal, but maize will fall under the category of cereal. Because if you look at maize, if you look at the plant, the maize plant, it almost looks like what? A grass. If you observe keenly, you will realize that that's a simple fact. And if you look at most of these other cereals, if you look at the wheat, the sorghum, and all these other cereals, you realize that their plants are almost look like what? Grass. But if you look at beans, it's not the case. Beans does not fall under the family of grass, and that is the reason why instead of it being a cereal, it is a pulse, because it comes in pots. Those small coverings that cover the beans. The beans is in the middle and there's a layer, 2 layers that surround it, covers it. It forms a pot. So, next, you have here a representation or a diagram of a cereal. So, the main parts constitutes of the pericarp, which is most of the times the outer covering or the seed coat, what covers the outer surface. Then we have the endosperm, and finally the aileron and the embryo. Now the embryo is what develops into the plant. It develops into the plumule and the radicle, and the radicle will develop into the root and the plumule into the shoot. Now this endosperm, this is where the seed stores all its food reserves. Now the question you may be asking yourself is, where does the seed derive its energy in order for it to grow? Because we both know in order for something to grow, it must need what? Energy. But if you look at the seed, where does it get its energy? Generally, we know that plants obtain their energy from the process of what? Photosynthesis, where they rely on sunlight. But if you look at the seed, does it have leaves? No. So how does it have, which therefore means that it cannot carry out photosynthesis. So where does it get its food? Where does it get its energy? The answer is very, very simple. This is where the energy is stored in the endosperm. So until the seedling bears its first leaves, that is when it can now start photosynthesizing. Take note. Okay. We'll look at the nutrient contents of each and every one of those parts. Now the first part, the pericarp, testa, or the aleurone layer, the nutrient contents are vitamin B, and as we know, vitamin B is simply a group of vitamins. That is why they are generally referred to as vitamin B complex. It is a complex, a family, a group of vitamins that have been put together because they share similar structure and similar other properties. So among this family, those that constitute in this particular pericarp are the niacin and the nicotinic acid. Then we have the scutellum, which constitutes of what? Cellulose in the form of bran, and we saw bran in the first part of the revision. We gave a detailed account of what brands are, and we said they contribute to what? The most important, one of the nutrients that they contribute the most is what? Fiber. And finally, vitamin B. Then we have the germ layer, which constitutes of vitamin B, C, protein, and fat, and finally to starch. Then the endosperm, which constitutes of vitamin B, protein, and starch. Question 6. B. Discuss the advantages of including a combination of cirrus and pulses. There we go. You now see the difference. Cirrus and pulses in the menu. What is the advantage? And if you look at here, you realize that most of our meals constitute of what? Most, if not most, I didn't say all, constitute of this type of combination. For example, you see rice and beans. The rice is cereal, the beans is pulse. You see corn chaff. You see the maize from cereals, and this one is from, the beans is from pulse. So this combination, how advantageous is it? How does it benefit you? And the reason is very simple. Each and every one of these food items, the cereals and the pulses, they have completely different protein content, different amino acids, different nutrients. So by the time you now combine them, it helps to do what? Complement each other. And at the end of the day, you are able to have a complete amino acid, or the essential amino acid, because you obtain from this part and you obtain from this part, and you now combine both. So combining cereals and pulses provides most of the amino acids which complement each other to provide a better quality protein. That's one of the advantages. And the second advantage is the fact that they complement the diet through a combination of their respective nutrients, because the nutrient content of maize or the nutrient content of cereals is not the same as the nutrient content of pulse. Are we there? They are not the same. So by the time you're able to combine both, it therefore means that what? You are combining the nutrient content of two different people. And at the end of the day, you're able to have something that is conclusive, something that is significant. So that is the advantage now of what? Combining cereals and pulse. Typical examples: rice and beans and corn chaff. It's a combination of cereals and pulses. C part says, define fermentation. Then indicate the cereal products prepared by fermentation for 5 marks. Now, what is fermentation? Very simple. Fermentation is simply the enzymatic breakdown of starch or sugar, glucose to be specific in most cases, in the absence of oxygen to produce what? Alcohol and carbon dioxide. Take very good note of this. Alcohol and carbon dioxide. And it can be represented on an equation which we have before us. This is your glucose, The reaction taking place in the absence of oxygen and in the presence of an enzyme known as yeast, giving you alcohol, in which case we are referring to ethanol, and your carbon dioxide gas. Now, if you look at most attempts, if you look at palm wine, once you harvest palm wine, generally when you store palm wine in a container, you don't close the container completely. Why? Why so? Very simple. This reaction is taking place. And because this reaction is taking place, fermentation reaction is taking place, carbon dioxide is produced. And carbon dioxide is a gas, and you cannot close a gas, you cannot contain a gas. You must look for a way to escape. That's why you see if you completely close the bottle of palm wine, what happens? The bottle starts doing what? Swelling, because the carbon dioxide is produced and it is expanding. Keeps on expanding the bottle. At one point in time, you get a pop sound because the carbon dioxide is trying to do what? Escape. And you'll also realize, and bear with me, that once you harvest palm wine, freshly tapped palm wine, you can finish a liter and you're still on your feet. But I bet you by the time that palm wine sleeps overnight, you won't be able to finish that same liter. Very simple. And you realize that it's also, by the time it sleeps overnight, the following day, it is no longer as sweet as it was in the beginning. Why so? Very simple. When you harvest it freshly, it is sweet. That's sweet as a result of what? Glucose. Now, the more time unfolds itself, what happens? This yeast keeps on breaking down this glucose to ethanol and carbon dioxide. And that is more of the reason why by the time it sleeps overnight, it's no longer sweet, because all of the glucose has been converted to alcohol. And you realize that the following day it becomes more alcoholic because the sugar has been converted to alcohol, which is ethanol. And that's the reason why you are unable to finish that same liter. So that's just an aside. Back to business. So what are the different products obtained from fermentation or prepared by fermentation? They are very simple. We have the beer that most of us consume, of course. Yes. We have wine, we have sha, we have bilibili, and we have a lot more. These are just few. That says define TVP and describe the process of any named TVP for 8 marks. Now, this is one of the most unusual parts. This question is one of the unusual parts so far in food science for me, I think so. But nevertheless, what is TVP? TVP simply stands for texture vegetable protein, and it is also known as sour meat, and it is defatted sour flour produced or products or byproducts of extracting soybean oil. Now, all this literature, what is it all about? Generally, TVPs are simply acting as what? Protein substitute, meat substitute. Let me put it that way. They are acting as meat substitute, and generally, we know meat contains what? It provides us with what? Proteins. So if you look at TVP, it's talking of texture vegetable protein. So generally, these food items known as TVP, they tend to have the texture of meat, provide us with protein. Yes, that's why we say protein substitute, but they are from plant origin, and that's why you see there vegetable. So TVP is simply an abbreviation for what? Texture vegetable protein. And that's why I also call them sour meat. Sour meat, the sour is coming from what? Soya beans or soybeans. Are we there? So you obtain your soybeans, you extract all the oil from it. What is now left of it, the chaff or the byproduct, that is what is now used to produce the flour, and the flour is now processed passes through a series of stages, and it's now shaped into a particular shape. And you now look at it and you think it's meat, whereas it's not meat. I know it may be sounding strange, but right here we have an image, and an example of TVP is tofu or bean curd. And when we talk of bean curd or tofu, what is it? As you can see from the image, very attractive. Just by sight, it looks very delicious, right? But that is not meat. That is not meat. That is bean, soybean, which has been processed. And that is the reason, and it's a typical example of what? TVP. Because it is a meat substitute. It looks like meat. You may be tempted to say that's meat. Oh, that's meat. I want to consume it. But that is not meat. And in most cases, it can be consumed or put in your food in the case where you don't have money to buy a meat, because it's cheaper than meat in some cases. Cheaper than meat. So you can also put it in your food, and you also obtain proteins. Because remember, proteins can be gotten both from plant origin and from animal origin. So that's just an example of a TVP, tofu, as you can see on the image. So now let's look at the second part. Describe the process of any named TVP. So I've already named our TVP as tofu. That's the example I've given. I will now want to look at the processing of tofu. What are the ingredients required to produce our tofu? The ingredients are milk of soybeans, water, and coagulant. As simple as that. And when we talk of coagulant, you can have examples such as calcium sulfate, magnesium chloride. And the coagulant is simply, in this case, is simply there to do what? To help to make the texture to become thicker or solid. Coagulate. You know, when something coagulates, the texture changes. So that's the function of that coagulant. So you have your soy bean milk, and you have to coagulate it to become solid in order for you to have the shape of what you saw in the previous slide, something that looks like a meat. So how does it go about? How is the processing? Diagrammatically, we have something of this sort. So you have your soybeans, which have been soaked. Dried soya beans is soaked for a period of say 12 to 14 hours. You soak your soya beans, and after soaking them, what next do? You mill it, you grind, and you mix with what? Water. Upon grinding and mixing with water, you now do what? The soil milk is then extracted with a roller press. So you obtain the residue and you press it, and you get a particular juice that comes out, and we'll refer to it as the soybean juice. Now, to that juice, that extract that comes out, we are at this level. We first of all soaked it here for 12 to 14 hours. Then we had to grind it, mill it, and mix with water at this level. Then after doing that, we press it, and the juice that comes out of it, the extract, is what we now refer to as the soybean juice. Now, to this juice, what happens? We now act our coagulant or coagulating agent, in which case we talked of magnesium chloride, or also could be calcium sulfate. And what does it do? It simply helps now to make it thick, to make the texture thick, so that it can have a shape or look something like what we saw in our previous slide. Then after this stage, what next do? You now have to press it so that it can remove whatever liquid that may be left in it again, because the texture has already changed, it's almost solid, but you have to press it again to remove whatever texture that is left in it. That is it here, or at this level where you are now pressing. After pressing it, what next do? You now obtain a solid part, almost solid. The texture is thick, so you obtain your solid part. And once you obtain your solid part, now what do you do with it? You can now decide to cut that solid part into various shapes. As you can see here, you now cut them into various shapes. You wash them, and after washing them with water, the final stage is what? You now pasteurize. The reason why you are finalizing it by pasteurization is because you are not trying to get rid of any microorganism that may have sustained the processing, may have withheld or resisted all the temperatures and the processing. So you now pasteurize, and it gets rid of everything. you package, and after packaging you now have that structure that we saw on that plate that looked like meat and very attractive and delicious. Okay, that was just an outside. Back to business. So that is a process involved in the processing of tofu, which happens to be an example of TVP. Okay. And under section D, the first part or the first question says, referring to examples from various regions in Cameroon, identify the various native staple foods from the 10 regions. 15 marks. Wow, I love this. Now, traditional meals. What are the different traditional meals from the different regions? All 10 regions. So let's begin with the center, since I happen to be in the center, though I'm not from the center. So we have native delicacies like cock, which is actually ero, with cassava or bobolo, or you may also have zoom salé with cassava. The littoral, we have things like ndole and miondo or plantain. They will have bongo chobi with cassava, or you may as well go with plantain. Then from the northwest, which most of us come from, though I'm not from the northwest still, we have the achu and yellow soup. Then we have corn fufu and huckleberry, what we typically call fukon and nja. You may also have things like delicacies like kati kati with corn fufu. You may also have something like how do they call it? Nantari. Nantari, that's another one too. So in the southwest, yes, where I now come from, we have delicacies such as fufu and ero, very common, ekwang, kwakoko and banga soup, and not to forget my special delicacy, esuba with black soup. Wow. So from the west, we have nkui and corn fufu, kondre and pompile. From the east, we have bem with cassava, mbole with cassava fufu. From the north, we have keleng keleng with corn fufu or nyiri with foleri. I've never seen that before. From the south, we have zom sangsel with cassava, or may as well have sanga. I love that one. From the far north, now you must take note, the Adamawa, far north and the north, they almost have the same delicacies or the same native foods. So that's the reason why you will see here, you will see the niri with foleri. Then you have the millet balls. Same thing applies here, millet balls and keleng keleng with corn fufu. So with that, I'm sure you'll get most of the marks, if not all the marks. So state 5 measures that can be adopted to conserve nutrients during the preparation and cooking of any chosen native staple food. Any. You can choose any. And you now tell us what are the things you can do to conserve the nutrients such that the nutrients are not lost in the course of processing the food from one stage to another. So what are the things you can do? For my choice of food, I've decided to work with corn fufu and huckleberry, or what we typically call fufu corn and nja. Good. So what are the things you can do? Measures involve: do not peel off the skin of the maize before grinding. Excuse me. So this practice is very common with most people, where they want their corn fufu to, where they want the skin to be shiny, kind of shiny and attractive. They usually do what? They remove the skin. But what they fail to understand is that by the time you are removing the skin, you are depriving yourself of what? Of a particular nutrient referred to as what? Fiber. So reduce the amount of water used in cooking. Reasons being that what? Remember we said vegetables. Vegetables, they provide 2 key nutrients, fibers and vitamins. And most of these vitamins, there are two groups of vitamins. We have the fat soluble vitamins referred to as ADEK, that is vitamin A, D, E, and K. They will have the water soluble vitamins, which are generally the vitamin B complex and the vitamin C's. And these vitamins, water soluble B and C's, happen to be in vegetables. So by the time you are preparing vegetable with so much water, what does it mean? It simply means that these vitamins will leave the vegetable and seep into the water. And the common practice that most people do here in town is when they're preparing huckleberry or vegetables or whatsoever, what do? They parboil the vegetable, get rid of the water, squeeze the vegetable, then get rid of the water, then collect now the rest of it and fry, exposed to high temperature for a long period of time, and then they eat comfortably and they say they are taking nutrients. What you have simply done is you have simply discarded most of the vitamins, because these vitamins happen to be what? Dissolve in water. That's why we talk of water soluble vitamins. So to avoid that, to conserve the nutrient in this case, what do? You prepare with very little water, reduce water. Then reduce the cooking time for vegetables. Vegetables are prepared high temperature, short time. That's it. You don't expose it for too long. Then the final points we have: reduce the surface area of the food. For example, vegetables that is exposed, be it exposed to heat or whatsoever. Then finally, do not squeeze the vegetables after parboiling. The more you squeeze, you are forcing all those nutrients that are still trying to remain in it, you are forcing them out, and then you take the water and you discard. Then you now eat chaff, or you say you have eaten food. So these are some common practices to conserve nutrients during the preparation of the special delicacy fufu corn and huckleberry. So next, advance 5 dangers of excessive consumption of inorganically cultivated food products for 5 marks. Now, first of all, what are inorganically cultivated food products? When we talk of inorganically cultivated food products, we are referring to those food items produced using processes that involve synthetics. And when we talk of synthetics, we are referring to what? Things that have been manufactured by man. So we talk of man-made fertilizers and man-made pesticides. Those are synthetics. You should not be confused with the natural fertilizers. That one is different. Synthetics are those that have been produced by man. So those crops that are cultivated this way are those that are referred to as what? Inorganically cultivated foods. So what is the advantage of consuming, what is the danger of consuming such food over a prolonged period of time? What do you expose yourself to? First, residues of these pesticides and fertilizers or chemicals that are used in the process may be left in the food item, and as a result, upon consumption over a prolonged period of time, it may therefore affect the central nervous system, the respiratory, and the gastrointestinal system of man. That is a disadvantage and a danger. Again, amines produced from nitrogenous fertilizers, which most of the times are from synthetics, man-made, causes cancer. So you keep on consuming this product and you tell yourself, no, I'm consuming good food, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But what you fail to understand is the fact that they may contain some residues. Sorry for that. Okay. So the next point, boron, which simply is an element present in some synthetics, may result to low sperm counts and eye irritation upon excessive consumption. Very, very important. So that said, those are some of the dangers of consuming inorganically cultivated food products over a prolonged period of time. Last question under section D, which says, examine the problems affecting food production in Cameroon. Problems, things that affect the production of food in Cameroon. What are some of those things? What are some of the things that affect output, production of food in Cameroon? Now, I'm going to give them in point form, but I will explain each point. Now, we'll talk of land degradation. This is very common. People cultivate over the same piece of land for a prolonged period of time, and because they keep on cultivating for a long period of time, what happens to the nutrients and the fertility of the soil? The fertility of the soil decreases, and because the fertility decreases, what happens to output? Output is low, so food production now is affected. That is a problem. Another point, climate change or environmental conditions. Now, it is very obvious. In order for food production to increase, the conditions, environmental conditions, must be conducive. Rainfall, and so on and so forth. But imagine a situation where there is no rainfall, no water, the soil is so hard, you cannot even plant your seed. So what do you expect to harvest at the end of the season or at the end of the year? Nothing. So production, food production, what happens to food production? It decreases. So that too is a problem. Another aspect is the agricultural diseases. Now, most of the times you may plant your crops, at the end of the day they are infested, maybe pests infested or microorganisms infest them, fungi, bacteria, and so forth, and they tend to have a disease. And because of that, what happens to output? Output is low, very low, because most of the plants were infected by some of the agricultural diseases. So food production too is affected. Then you have the low level of technology or machinery. Now, we both know Cameroon is not yet a developed country, we're still a developing country, and because of that, our technology is still somewhere behind as compared to developed countries like America. You see, they use high machineries, and with just a small piece of land, they're able to make the most out of it. But if you give that same piece of land to someone in Cameroon, because of the low level of technology, he or she will be unable to make the most out of it. So because of low technology and machineries that are used in the agricultural sector, what happens to the food production? It is affected. Then the last part, we have low income. Most of those that are involved in agriculture, they have very, very low income, and because their income is low, they are unable to purchase fertilizers or pesticides which will guarantee their output, because most of the times, most of these plants, some of them need fertilizer, they need an extra touch, they may be infested with pests, so you need a pesticide to guarantee everything. But because they don't have the income, they don't have the means to purchase those things, so what happens to their output? It's affected, drops, and food production too drops. Lack of experts. Now, we know in order for anything to work out perfectly well, we need an expert, someone who has been in the field, who knows how things are done. But in our agriculture, in our setting, the Cameroon setting, we lack experts in the field of agriculture. Not that we lack, we have, but there are not enough. And because of that, every Jack and Jill finds himself in the farm and does whatever, just does things the way he knows them. Whereas with the help of an expert will be able to tell you, okay, this soil is best for this type of crop, this one is best for this type of crop, cultivate it this way, do this and do that. That's the job of an expert. But because we lack experts, we're unable to make the most out of the resources which we have. Then we have transport. Very important. How you may have a piece of land right in the forest. How do you get there? How? There is no route. Maybe you have your piece of land, your farm, very big plantation, you have planted plantains, harvested them, you are ready to sell them, you are ready to send them to different parts of the country, but there is no route leaving your village to town or to Yaoundé. So how do those food items get to the other part? No way. How do fertilizers and pesticides from town or other incentives from town get to you or those right deep in the suburbs? How do they get to them? Unable to get to them simply because of what? There is no passage, there is no route. So transport too is an important part that affects what? Food production. Then finally, conservation and lack of skills. In other way, farm education. Most farmers are very conservative. Conservative in what sense? You will tell the farmer, do it this way. Look at this soil is best fit for that. In order for you to plant by this one, do it by this way, and so on and so forth. And the person will tell you, this is the method my forefathers have been using. This is the method my ancestors have been using on this same piece of land, and we have been harvesting very well. So what makes you think that you can now come and start speaking grammar to me and you expect me to just change all of a sudden? So there is always that word, that conservative nature. They always like to stay with what they are very comfortable with. So at the end of the day, it affects their output, and food production too is affected. B section says advanced measures which have been attempted to modernize this sector. Which sector are we referring to? The food production sector. In other words, the agricultural or the agronomy sector. So what are some of the things that have been attempted, that have been done to modernize this sector by our country? First, we have government incentives or subsidies. Subsidies. So generally, most of the times, the government tries as much as possible to subsidize in the agricultural sector, try and provide fertilizers and pesticides to some of the farmers, educate them in order for them to know which methods to use, how to apply the chemicals, and so on and so forth. Most of these things has to do what? They want to modernize the sector. They want to do it in such a way that it can improve on food production. Next point, the growth of the agricultural sector. Now, in our setting, Cameroon, for example, you realize that the government is investing so much into agriculture. You see, the government tries as much as possible to open more and more agricultural schools. If you go to universities, you have the Faculty of Agriculture. Train students, train people how to do the agriculture, but in a modern way, such that at the end of the day, the output, the harvest is much or greater, and as a result, food production increases. Next point, improving access to land and other natural resources. The government improves access to that. It gives every single person the right to own a piece of land. Everybody has a right, be it male or female. There's gender balance. You can own your piece of land. You decide to have to farm in there and do your things. Transform the goods from one farm to another, and at the end of the day, the production margin increases. Then you also have transport. The government has done a lot, and they are still doing a lot, though their efforts are still pending. But they have tried as much as possible to construct roads that link villages to towns, or link one village to the other, or link different parts of the country, such that food can move from one part to another, and raw materials too, such as raw materials or incentives or whatsoever, fertilizers, pesticides, can move from town to village, and at the end of the day, the food items too can move from village back to town. That way, the production margin increases and food production is stabilized. Now, the next point, stabilization of food supply. Now, when we talk of stabilization of food supply, what do we mean? This is a measure in order to modernize the sector adopted by the government in such a way that it consists of three aspects. We have stock holding. When we talk of stock holding, that is, the government tries as much as possible that at the end of the day, after production of a particular food item or food production, the government tries as much as possible to put an embargo, to put a limit that, okay, this is the quantity that remains in the country. It is not exported. So if you have anything less than that quantity, nothing is exported until you have above the quantity. That is when you can export. So we talk of what? Stock holding. A particular quantity that the government keeps for the country itself. It does not move. We talk of increased importation. Now, in most cases, our country, for example, we may be good at cultivating some type of crops, but not all type of crops. So the government tries as much as possible to complement those that our country cannot produce by importing them from outside. So you have importation of different food items to complement those we have in our country already. That way, the food production margin is high. And finally, increased production. And the increased production goes alongside with measures that the government has put into place to increase production through, for example, incentives to increase production. The government tries as much as possible to increase production by subsidizing, trying to educate the people, trying to adopt different farming methods and so on and so forth, so that at the end of the day the production margin too can be high. So these are all different methods, different measures, different techniques or attempts the government has put into place in order to modernize this sector so that it will have a positive effect or influence on the production of food and on the production margin. Of the question, which says, examine ways in which the government can protect the health of consumers through improved food quality. Now, it is very simple. The government tries as much as possible to protect the health of the consumers, because if the government does not play a role in that, the producers will tend to do what? Exploit the consumers. So the government puts in place different measures to protect their health and to protect their interests. And some of these measures are what? The first one, the government agencies to control food quality. There are agencies in place that tries as much as possible to control the quality of food that is produced in our country or any other item, to make sure that that food item is up to what standard. There is a particular standard that you must have. So there's an agency by the government that controls all those things to make sure that whatever thing that leaves your industry or company, it is of standard. That way the consumers are not exploited and they are not affected, be it through their health or whatsoever, or financially. So we have the control of food quality. Then government also checks on advertisement, advertised goods to avoid what? Misbranding. We'll talk of misbranding. What is misbranding? Now, generally, there's a general setting is the fact that when you produce a particular food item, you must be accompanied by what we call food labeling, or we call labeling. And that label simply carries what? It carries every information pertaining to that food item or pertaining to that product. It gives the name of the product, the day it was manufactured, the day is going to expire, all information, the nutrient content, what is present in it, the chemicals, and so on and so forth. So when we talk now of misbranding, misbranding is simply the act of putting on that paper, putting on that label, an information which is false. Putting on that label an information which is false, maybe in a bit to do what? You want to increase your sale, you want to attract people, you want to call consumers. So because of that, you start saying things which are false. Imagine a situation, you're selling a food item and you say, okay, this bottle of drink can make you to fly. And people now start thinking, okay, instead of me paying 3,000 francs to go to Douala, so instead of paying 3,000 francs to go to Douala, a person decides, okay, let me just buy this bottle of drink, which costs just 500 francs, so that I can drink it and fly to Douala and keep my remaining 2,500 francs. So you put a false information pertaining to that food product because you want to call people to buy. That is misbranding. So the government has agencies that are out there to check that whatever advert that you do, whatever thing that you release, whatever information that is attached to it is actually valid and true. So the next point, sorry, government price control committees to control prices of foodstuffs. That is very important. The government must control the prices. If not, you may have a situation where people will buy things, stock them somewhere, and wait until the ones that are available in the market gets finished, and then now bring their own items and say, okay, since the item is very scarce, instead of selling for 1,000 francs, they start selling for 2,000 francs. In that case, they are exploiting the consumers. So the government is there to control that, to make sure that the prices are respected, irrespective of their status. The next point, government health and sanitary officers check premises. where food is prepared, and these guys are out there to check wherever food is prepared or anything that has to do with food and drink. They check all those things. Is the place clean? Are they following hygienic standards? What about sanitation? Because what happens is you may prepare all those things, everything is okay, but at the end of the day, if the environment is not fit, the food may get contaminated, and when the consumer consumes the food item, instead of eating the food to make himself to be healthy, the food may instead affect the person's health, and the person at the end of the day tends to be unhealthy. So there are measures, people out there checking everything to make sure that the place where all those premises where they are prepared are actually up to standard and they are safe and hygienic. Then veterinary doctors who are out there in most places where they slaughter, or most slaughterhouses, you see that veterinary doctors out there to check if the meat or the animal that are slaughtering, if that animal is not carrying a disease or is actually fit for consumption. And if at any point in time they realize that the animal is not fit for consumption, what do? They prevent that particular meat or animal from being sold to the public. That way, consumers don't buy something which will instead cause them more harm than good. Now, we talk of government prohibits the sale of adulterated foods. Now, we talk of adulterated food. What are these foods? These are foods that have been tampered with. Tampered with in the sense that they may be diluted to increase the size so that their sales can increase. You try to tamper with the natural state of something. Take for example palm wine. You add water to it to increase the quantity. They take sugar and put. You have adulterated that palm wine. So you tamper with the natural state of something, maybe to increase the size so that you sell more. So the government prohibits the sales of adulterated foods. Then finally, adequate food labeling. The government puts measures to make sure that every food item that is released carries a food label, all the nutrients present in the food, the day it was produced, the name of the producer, the manufacturing industry, the day it's going to get expired, and so on and so forth. All the additives and whatsoever must be present. That way, when the consumer is buying a particular food item, he or she knows what is consuming. If he knows that I'm allergic to maybe say cyanide, and you get your particular food item and you see there one of the nutrients there is cyanide, you simply avoid and you prevent yourself from being unhealthy. Then finally, government organizes cleanup campaigns to reduce food contamination. This is very common in our society and our setting. There are days that are dedicated. They say, okay, from this time to this time, no store should be open. Everybody should be busy trying to clean his surrounding. And why are they emphasizing so much on that? Because at the end of the day, if your surrounding is clean, no matter what you prepare, it may be contaminated. And once it is contaminated, whosoever consumes it is no longer safe because the health of the person is affected. So with that, of part 2 and the end of presentation. So shortly, no time, sometime soon, the second part or the next part of our revision lessons or class will unfold. And thank you once more for your keen attention, and I hope you were able to get one or two things, understand one or two things, and hopefully you may have some questions, some doubts. Feel free, get to me. You may leave a comment at the end of the video. At the end of the video, you may leave a comment. You may get to me directly. My contact is there, or you may get to me through the forum, or post your questions or your doubts, and we will attend to you. And at the end of the day, everybody leaves back satisfied. So until I come your way again, I remain your humble presenter and teacher, Dr. Stanley, aka Mboko Prof. Have a nice day. Ciao.